It is 9:30 p.m. Central African Time. This is the Globe on SABC News, coming to you live from Johannesburg. It's so good to have you with us this evening. I'm Simphiwe Ngong. Good evening.
A very good evening to you, and thank you for joining us. I'm Lulu Gabu. On to our top story. Zimbabwe's economy is set to shrink this year due to factors such as drought, severe power cuts, fuel shortages and lack of investments in the productive sectors.
Well, previously the government estimated growth of 3%. Finance Minister Mthuli Ncube has revealed they are expecting a contraction of 3%.
GDP growth this year will be negative. Yeah, negative. We're expecting something in the order of minus 3% as the government. In the budget, I didn't mention the figure because there are too many figures doing rounds. But we're expecting minus 3%. I must say this, but I expect two sectors to surprise us on the upside. It's mining and it's tourism sector. Tourism sector is always low-hanging fruit. You can't get into big falls, hotels are full, we need more hotels. It's a fantastic sector, jobs for foreign currency earnings as well. And then mining sector, the government is doing a lot in driving that sector. It's going to be easily a $12 billion industry in terms of additional investment over the next 3 years. So those two sectors will surprise us on the upside, but naturally, the agricultural sector is down, manufacturing is flat, but the issue is really agriculture and then the electricity and so forth as part of GDP. That's where we are heading.
With power cuts of up to 18 hours per day, Zimbabwe's economy is losing more than $200 million weekly due to the prolonged power crisis.
Fears are also growing that some companies will shut down within a month if government fails to come up with an urgent solution to the rolling massive power outages. A deal has been struck with Eskom in South Africa after some of Zimbabwe's backlog was paid.
And authorities are trying to assure industries that power will be restored.
The economy has no fuel. The economy has no electricity. And on electricity, it is actually affecting productive capacity because our industries, instead of performing on a 3-day shifts, they are now performing on a 1-day shifts with all the contract workers sent home. So maybe the resources that we are accumulating as surpluses should be used to import or procure those economic enablers in form of electricity, in form of fuel.
The arrangement that we've put into place now on electricity should hopefully guarantee us increased supply from tomorrow or Wednesday. We have been engaging with the suppliers of electricity, whom I would not want to mention because it's not my role to mention them, but we have actually agreed on some of the repayment terms of the debt. I think the first installment was made last week. We are going to be making weekly installments for the legacy debt, and we have also agreed that we'll then pay on a current basis for the supplies that we are now going to be using.
We are now joined via Skype from Harare in Zimbabwe by Economic Analyst John Robertson. Mr. Robertson, a very good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. First of all, what's your reaction to the latest development in Zimbabwe owing to the power crisis, which has led to the country losing $200 million per week?
Yes, we've in very serious difficulties now because we do have a very adverse balance of trade, and we have now closed down many of the export factories because of these power cuts. So we are having a great deal more difficulty earning the money that we need to pay for the imports. The fuel and electricity crisis has badly damaged what was left of our economy, and so it's very likely that our GDP is going to shrink even faster than has now been forecast by the Minister. If we don't fix the power crisis, many of the companies will not be able to continue in business as they're trying to run factories on generators now at a very high cost for fuel, and of course we are already at a disadvantage producing goods at a cost that is too expensive to easily sell them abroad.
The Finance Minister last week spoke of fiscal surpluses and the relaxation of local ownership requirements for the platinum industry. But looking at a country with daily power cuts of up to 18 hours a day and a massive shortage of basic commodities such as bread and fuel, this is a stark contraction or a stark antithesis of his statement.
Well, the inflation is likely to get to more than 200%. It means that everything is costing 3 times what it cost a year ago. And it's actually worse than that when you get to the exchange rate, because the exchange rate has moved to 1/10 of the exchange rate we had at the beginning of the year. And that means that while we've converted all the dollars in the banks into the new Zimbabwe dollar, about 90% of the value of our savings has disappeared. So that is the kind of capital that might have gone into reinvesting in Zimbabwe, and our capacity to actually invest in the country now has been diminished with this massive reduction in the value of savings in the corporate bodies and, of course, personal savings. We need to regain credibility around the world to attract the foreign investors who might bring capital to the country. But right now, none of them take us seriously because we have not followed through with any of the promises that we made when the change of administration took place with the ousting of Robert Mugabe. Many promises were made, but we have failed to keep them, and we now totally lack credibility.
And remember, Mr. Robertson, that at the beginning of the year, the Finance Minister also forecast month-on-month inflation, which surged to 39.3% in June, saying that by the end of the year, it will be almost zero. I mean, what gives him so much confidence? What is it that he's expecting to change the local economy?
I think he was anticipating the possibility of stabilizing the exchange rate. You'd have to hold the exchange rate very constant for up to a year to start bringing inflation rates down to that sort of level. We will see a reduction in the rate of increase when we get to the anniversary of the October increases last year. So a couple more months should see a decrease, but only because of what happened last year, not because of something happening now. But right now we've got increases in electricity prices. Even though you can't buy electricity, it's gone to 3 times what it was. We're seeing fuel prices increasing as well, and wage increases are being demanded around the country. Everybody leasing and renting property is asking for higher rents. And so we've got a very sharp surge in costs for business as well. And these are all further impacting on our ability to compete in the world markets.
Would you attribute the further deterioration of that country's economy, which is on a constant free fall, to the delinking of that economy, of that currency to the parity with the US dollars, or would you attribute this to the poor governance structures in place in Zimbabwe?
I think the poor government has a lot more to do with it. Government was running budget deficits and causing money supply growth, even though we were supposedly using US dollars. But it's caused a big balloon of duplicated money, with government borrowing money and issuing paper to the banks to keep the banks' balance sheets right. It was paper that was going to mature in some time to come. But meanwhile, the government had the cash, and government was spending that money. And spending money in Zimbabwe these days means that you're going to be spending a lot of it on imports. And so the money borrowed from the banks had to be converted into foreign currency to pay for those imports. And we had huge money supply growth rates, which promised the certainty of inflation to come, but also promised the depreciation of the money in our banking system, all electronic money these days, because there's hardly any bank notes to speak of. And electronic money has this rather curious position of being very large in numbers, but not retaining a stable exchange rate or a stable value. So it's that value shrinkage that we're now seeing, because the mounting numbers in the banks were not backed by actual production, and certainly not backed by export revenues. So it became a mythical value, and that just could not last. That's the reason it has now shrunk to 1/10 of what it was at the beginning of this year.
You were quoted in in a South African online publication as having said that, I'm just going to quote you verbatim, you said that the fundamental problem is that the government has failed to attract significant investment and hasn't substantially changed the policies of the Mugabe era. Looking at the fact that former President Robert Mugabe was in power for close to 4 decades, and his influence within the party, within the ruling party and within Zimbabwe has been deeply entrenched, and it's going to take a while to dismantle his networks within the ruling party and of course within Zimbabwe. It can even take years. So are you projecting that things will become the same or even worse moving forward?
It has been a long case of very, very poor respect for things like property rights, which has done enormous damage to investor confidence. And the real problem started 20 years ago when land was taken off the market. Now, we've got billions of dollars worth of land in Zimbabwe, which was taken down to zero in value terms by government's decision to nationalize the land, declare it to be the property of the state, and making it impossible for people to use the land as collateral for bank loans. So that did the most damage to the country 20 years ago. And ever since then, for these last 20 years, we've been dependent on importing food. Previously, we were a food exporting country, and having to import food for the last 20 years has cost us many billions of US dollars, with which we could have settled our international debts, we could have built new power stations, we could have maintained the railways and the airways, we could have seen employment growth, and instead we've lost 400,000 jobs in Zimbabwe. So the number of people who actually have steady income these days is a very small fraction of the total population. All of these add up to lower revenues for government taxes, lower export revenues, increasing debt, and decreasing credibility amongst investors. The people who could have made a difference have chosen not to bring their expertise or their capital to Zimbabwe. So we have isolated ourselves from the developments around the world for the last 20 years. And it did actually start earlier than that, because disrespect for property rights had come through and government decided they could reallocate the foreign currency allocations and the import licenses to preferred beneficiaries, people who had been loyal to the party, people who had assisted in the liberation struggle. Very emotional ideas of that nature were used to determine who resources would go to. And of course, when people become eligible for or entitled to receive resources of that nature, it tends not to use them productively because it's so easy to get the next tranche and you don't have to worry about making good use of them.
All right. Mr. John Robertson, thank you so much for your reflections. We do appreciate it. That was Economic Analyst, Mr. John Robertson, speaking to us live on the line from Harare, just sharing with us his analysis of the developments in Zimbabwe. And as we heard there are also fears that the companies in Zimbabwe will shut down as a result of the rolling power outages in that country. This is The Globe. We'll take a short break. We'll be right back.